Hey everybody, this video is called The Defeat of Amnon, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of First Chronicles, looking at the 20th chapter. And this chapter is going to be very short. It's only 8 verses, which I believe is probably the shortest chapter in the book of First Chronicles that I've seen yet. And I think it is the shortest book, correct me if I'm wrong. But tonight we look at the defeat of Amnon, and we're going to start here with First Chronicles chapter 20 verse 1, and it says, "It happened in the spring of the year, at a time when kings go out to battle, that Joab led out the armed forces and ravaged the country of the people of Ammon, and came and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed at Jerusalem, and Joab defeated Rabbah and overthrew it." So the chronicler was not inspired by God to mention David's sin with Bathsheba and the sins that we saw recorded back in 2 Samuel's account in 2 Samuel 11 and chapters 12. And the adultery and the murder at this time occurred while David stayed in Jerusalem instead of going to battle. And this story was likely omitted because the purpose that the chronicler wanted to get through was to focus on God's permanent interests in his people, in his nation of Israel, in the security of David's kingdom. And wars at this time would not be like wars today that just continue on throughout the year regardless of weather. Wars at this time would typically pause due to the fact of the weather not being very favorable and cold weather and all that, and made it very challenging with bad weather elements. You know, they didn't have the equipment that most militaries you have today to be able to go out and continue their battles throughout harsh cold winters. And fighting would resume in the spring, as verse 1 states that this battle did. And what happened when David remained at Jerusalem, it was so well known that the chronicler did not need to record it here. In 2 Samuel, we get a very good breakdown of it in chapters 11 and 12. And the account in 2 Samuel 12, verses 26 through 31, tells us that Joab essentially conquered Rabbah, but called David to help with the final conquest of the city after David's sin and subsequent repentance. And this was the final phase of David's restoration, as he went back to doing what he should have been doing all along, leading Israel out to battle instead of remaining in Jerusalem. And his sin did not condemn him to a life of failure and defeat, as it was a chastisement for his sin. It goes to show that even though David would face chastisement for his sin with the adultery and murder, that it would not be the end of him. His life would not be totally ruined. In verse 2 and 3 says, "Then David took their king's crown from his head and found it to weigh a talent of gold, and there was precious stones in it, and it was set on David's head. Also he brought out the spoil of the city in great abundance, and he brought out the people who were in it and put them to work with saws, with iron picks, and with axes. So David did all to the cities of the people of Ammon. Then David and all the people returned to Jerusalem." So verses 2 to 3 here, we see that there was still a crown for David's head. And David once again increased in his might and his power, bringing the riches back to Jerusalem for the sake of later building the temple, which the majority of the rest of the chapters we're going to be focusing on the preparation of the temple. And the example of extending Israel's security with its neighbors, it fits in the chronicler's broader purposes of showing how David prepared his way for his son to build the temple. In verses 4 through 7, it says, "Now it happened afterward that war broke out at Gezer with the Philistines, at which time Shebechai the Hushathite killed Sippai, who was one of the sons of the giant, and they were subdued. Again there was war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jair, killed Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, with 24 fingers and 24 toes, sits on each hand and sits on each foot. And he also was born to the giant. So when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, killed him. So verses 4 through 7, it's a little interesting when we see this figure with 6 fingers and 6 toes, you know, on both sets of feet and hands. And the chronicler, he is reflecting here 2 Samuel chapter 21 verse 15 through 22. And the chronicler, he chose not to write about some of the darker days in David's reign, especially the revolt of his son Absalom. And it was for the same reason, for the iniquity of the king with Bathsheba, as Bathsheba was left out. And Shebechai, Elhan, and Jonathan, they accomplished heroic deeds with David when David finished fighting the giants. And David's legacy lay not in only what he accomplished, but also what he left behind, a people that was prepared for victory. And verse 6 is weird, as I mentioned at the start. It says, and again there was a war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature with 24 fingers and 24 toes, sits on each hand, sits on each foot. And so he was also born to the giant. And we probably don't know anybody around us today that has 6 fingers on their right hand, 6 fingers on the left hand, 6 fingers on the left foot, 6 fingers on the right foot. You know, that is a very weird issue. I mean, it's more common to have to know about people born with abnormities, like maybe missing a toe or missing a finger. And this unnamed man of great stature, we see, was from Gath. And in history, there's actually been people born with the extra fingers or toes. The eldest son of the Emperor Urjava, who reigned in 1649, had a similar abnormity. And theologian Adam Clarke, he stated that he claimed witnessing to a young girl in Londonderry, Ireland, that likewise had 6 toes and 6, you know, fingers on each foot, whatever. Verse 8 says, to finish the chapter, these were born to the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So 1 Samuel 17:4 tells us that Goliath was from Gath, and so were Goliath's sons or brothers. And the defeat of these 4 giants is rightly credited to David, as he had a role in this through his example and his guidance and David's influence, overall David's leadership. So to wrap up today, we see that the chronicler shows Joab going back out next year to get Rabbah of Ammon. And then we see that the chronicler shows David wearing the crown of Ammon. And the chronicler moved the 3 victories over the 3 giants. And the chronicler ends this chapter with the summary of the victories over the Philistine giants. And we'll see you next, as we're going to be looking at David commanding a census to be taken. So the next video will be to be announced, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless.